Good. Okay.
All right. Here we are live. So excited to be back here with everyone. Hello. Welcome to our latest episode of DEI Unmasked Conversations That Bridge live. Before we dive into today's episode, as usual, we'd like to make it clear that the views and opinions we're going to express on this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect the views of any organization, company, or entity we may be associated with. Our discussions are personal and really meant for entertainment and informative purposes only. Now, during this live, if you would like to utilize closed captions, we certainly encourage you to do so. To enable your closed captioning, please navigate to the settings on your viewing platform. Additionally, please know that we value your participation and would love to stay connected. Please visit our LinkedIn page and follow us. And while there, we really encourage each of you to sign up for our email list once that has been launched. And by doing so, you'll receive timely alerts about our upcoming live sessions. We're so eager to involve you in really shaping our future discussions. So feel free to use the form that we share for you to share any questions or topics, suggestions that you'd like for us to explore in our upcoming episodes. DEI Unmasked is not just a podcast. It's an invitation to really peel back the layers, reveal the depth, and engage in a transformative dialogue. So let's unmask together. Tonight, we're going to be diving into the world of self-expression and really exploring the liberating journey of embracing who we truly are. So our theme for tonight's podcast is the hidden dangers of unapologetic self-expression. We live in a world that really encourages authenticity. And so we're going to be unpacking both the empowering aspects and the potential pitfalls of that authenticity. So grab your favorite beverage, settle in, and let's embark on this enlightening journey together. My name is Tanasha Lawcock, and I will be your co-host today. I will give a brief audio description for anyone who may need that. I am a medium-toned Black woman. I don't know what's happening today. I apologize. My lighting keeps going in and out for some reason, but I am sitting against a cream-colored backdrop. I have on a white sweater that has super cute stems on it that have little red hearts on it. And I'm wearing my nifty little glasses. And you could see today's book that I have displayed in my background is Protecting My Peace by Elizabeth Leiba, her new book. So I was excited to put that on display for everyone today. So now that I'm here with the rest of my co-hosts, we are ready to jump in and get this conversation started. So welcome once again to DEI Unmasked. Now, tonight's conversation, the first segment, what we really want to talk about, it kind of revolves around the theme of exploration. So I'm going to share and talk a little bit with the group here about what it truly means to engage in unapologetic self-expression. So this is a great opportunity for anyone who's here with us right now. You can share your insights in the chat or on LinkedIn using our hashtag DEI Unmasked. So as we dive into this, so excited to introduce you to my four fantastic co-hosts, each bringing their own unique perspectives to the table. So while you're sharing your insights, please join me in welcoming these incredible voices as we collectively navigate the contours of this liberating journey. So as we jump in, talking about engaging and what it truly means to engage in unapologetic self-expression, who would like to take that question and answer that question first?
I'll go first.
Is there anyone who has any thoughts here in the group? Anything that someone would like to share with us just about your respective thoughts about what that means to engage in unapologetic self-expression. Like I will say for me, I know it definitely means being open and honest about who I am as a person and the things that are important to me in my life. Definitely when we're in workspaces, we don't want to, sometimes we have to be mindful of, I should say, how much we share about ourselves personally, because that can create some conflict in the workplace. But for me, I try to be really open about certain things. The fact that I'm a mom, the fact that I have not just adult children, but that I have an adult son with multiple disabilities. I'm usually very forthcoming with that information because for me, that is an important part of who I am as a person. And with self expression, I would definitely say for me, my wardrobe. Because anybody who ever sees me knows I love color. Like I'm a bit of a fashionista, admittedly. I am a Moschino girl. So on any given day, you will usually see me in a piece of Moschino. So, but for the rest of the group, when you think about engaging in that self expression, what does that look like for some of my other co hosts?
I think Leandra was about to share.
Can y'all hear me? I got your internet is unstable little notification, so I wanted to check before I started talking in case I was in like robot mode and frozen with my eye half closed. But hello, everyone. I'm Leandra, and I think when I think about unapologetically being oneself or showing up authentically, I think that it takes like it both is liberating and can be tiring in many ways. So something that I think is really great is kind of the process of gradually unmasking. I think that sometimes when I imagine like living authentically, it's like, completely unmasking and suddenly just showing up 100% yourself when yesterday you were not. And I think that there is kind of a process of becoming more comfortable around people. And so it's like a slow unmasking process with individuals before it becomes a unmasking fully at work situation. But it's something that's really been significant for me is like showing up authentically in the online space. Because I think that with making connections in a new way, like once the pandemic started and like meeting all of these people from around the world, I think that I was always a little bit skeptical of strangers on the internet. And so I wanted to upfront, like, let people know what I'm about. So there is no question when you come to my inbox and introduce yourself to me that like, I occupy all of these identities and I care about these things. And it has resulted in, I think, me creating a circle of people that are really caring and that really care about the things that I am invested in, but it also can be really divisive and can keep people away that maybe I wouldn't have wanted to know in the first place. But like it keeps me from the connections of like who's on the other side of the things that I agree with. And so it's been interesting to feel like I'm becoming more and more myself and more comfortable with disclosing that or with that increased self-awareness. But I also find myself like feeling a little bit more defensive in that as well, because if someone is rude or if someone is, acting foolish, I tend to like go through the Rolodex of things that I've disclosed about myself to try and pinpoint what the one thing is that could be why they're acting strange. And so, yeah, I mean, I've clearly got a lot of thoughts about it and a lot of feelings about it, but I think it's felt like I can breathe a little clearer knowing that there are people who know me and not the version of me that I want them to like. It's like, whether you like me or not, I am showing up authentically and showing up as myself, so I don't have to spend more energy pretending to be something or someone that I'm not. That is exhausting, and that is something left in my 20s, and I'm not doing that anymore.
I love that.
That is so true, Leandra.
Also wanted to
Go ahead,
piggyback off
Chrystal.
of Tanasha. I wanted to piggyback off of Tanasha, what she said about being a fashionista. I too am a self-proclaimed fashionista, and in fact, I love fashion so much that I am looking to make a business out of it. So that's something that I'm currently working on. I feel like I'm able to uniquely identify or uniquely express myself rather when I dress. Dressing to me is an art form. Like you're literally taking garments and putting it on your body, and not just putting it on your body, but putting it on in a way that best suits your body, your unique body. It's something that I toyed with in my teens as I worked at a clothing store. So I had a lot of exposure to a lot of different fashion designers and things like that. And then going through the process of figuring it out in my 20s, and now that I'm in my 40s, it's one of those things where this is what I am. This is who I am. This is how I choose to express myself. Most people like it. Some people don't, and that's okay. I'm completely fine with that. I Some days I lean towards a more girly aesthetic, and some days I lean towards a tomboy aesthetic, and that's just who I am. It just depends on how I feel that day, and I really enjoy it. It's really just kind of like a similar effect of a painter making a painting. Like I get that satisfaction of I created this look, and yeah, I just it generates conversation a lot of times. Most of the times it's positive conversation, and again, sometimes there are some people that don't enjoy what I create, but that's all the part of creating art. Like people are going to enjoy it, and there's people that are not going to enjoy it, and you have to be okay with that.
And I'd like to quickly add to that, Tanasha. This is Courtni. One thing that with self-expression, unapologetic self-expression, that really helps me think about this. Whenever I think about being unapologetic, I always have to think about choosing myself first and foremost. And what does that mean to me? So, not to my family, not to friends, not to coworkers. What does that mean to me in every space I show up in? And then from there, thinking, what can I do to empower myself and empower others around me? And so when I think about being unapologetic, I do think about doing activities, taking actions that just make you feel like you. And that can be different for everyone. And I think when we talk about the dangers of unapologetic self expression, which we will get into, I think the dangers come when we have to put that mask on and we have to hide some part of ourselves that we feel is so important. So I'm really excited for today's conversation.
All excellent points. Thank you so much for jumping in on that, Courtni. And it really is so true with that self-expression, just like we've talked about as a group outside of this podcast. Some of those the highs and some of those lows from the risk that we take, because it is a risk to show up as your unapologetic and most authentic self. It is certainly a risk, especially if you belong to any sort of marginalized group and you're combating any sort of bias that may be against you based on the color of your skin, or if you have a disability, or if you're a LGBTQIA2S plus individual. So there are definitely some of those upsides and some of those downsides. So I'm really excited as we continue on this conversation to hear from all of you some more of your thoughts on this. So now that we've talked a little bit about what it means to us to engage in that unapologetic self-expression, let's get into our next segment and let's talk a little bit about a moment of triumph. So what I'm going to ask for anyone who wants to jump in, if anyone would like to share a personal moment of triumph or self-discovery that was tied to embracing your true self. And as we start discussing these moments of triumph or self-discovery for our audience, share with us in the chat any empowering experiences that you may have had when expressing your authentic self. So feel free to drop those stories in the chat because we'd love to celebrate them with you. So turn this over to my co-host. Is there anyone who would like to share something about a personal moment of triumph or self-discovery that helped you embrace your true self?
So this is Greta. And I would say one of the most, so I am so the opposite of a fashionista. The only reason I know anything about lipstick is because I had a couple of friends for a while that were beauty bloggers. So if I'm the girl that would show up and they're like, are those shoes comfortable? Because they look it. Yes, that was me. Yeah, really. They said that. So I think for me, my experience kind of went directly to the last couple of years, where I was finally able to be more honest with folks about my disabilities, about the challenges that I faced and have for 3 decades. So and that for me meant not just how I showed up for other people, but how I showed up for myself. Because a lot of that was a lot of managing a lot of internalized ableism. And so it wasn't always, it's still one of those things where I still am really think about it, right? I think about it in every, setting, in every space. And how do I bring this forward? What's, what am I comfortable with here? What's the context? What's the whatever? And on the same token, have become much more willing to, have been much more willing to have the conversation. And I'm so grateful for other folks who have kind of been willing to do the same. That helped kind of break down some of those barriers. And quite honestly, part of it was my students that brought it out of me. Because back then I was teaching and I felt like I was putting on this face that was like getting in the way of me truly supporting them and being able to show up as their full selves. So I think a lot of it had to do with them. Too, in terms of making that transition and being able to talk about those things. So for me, that was a triumph in the sense that, it's still in progress, uncovering layers, that kind of thing. But really to be able to feel more authentic and to be able to be there and be supportive of my students, colleagues, others who are in a similar position, and help make that space for other people as well.
Thank you so much for sharing, Greta. That is so beautiful. And I absolutely love the piece that you added at the end about making space for others. And that is one of those big upsides of authenticity in our self-expression, is the way that it can bolster and empower people around us. Because the same way that we want to feel comfortable being able to show up as our full authentic selves, we want others to be able to have that opportunity as well. So beautiful, beautiful points. Thank you for sharing that, Greta. Is there anyone else who'd like to talk about a moment that they've had? I see Leandra nodding. Leandra said,
Sure,
I wasn't nodding for that.
I'm fine with sharing. I think something that has been really impactful for me in advocating for myself is like discovering late in life that I was neurodivergent after wondering why it was so hard to learn my entire educational experience. And I think that even though there's still a lot of questions and there's still a lot of frustration, there is something about that clarity and about being able to advocate for myself in spaces where people are open to accommodating different kinds of learning. And that's been really wonderful, as well as I found, like, now that I know more about myself and the more self-aware I am, the more I'm able to seek community that shares lived experience with me. And so whether it's like a chronic illness memes Facebook page, or if it's a support group or some other forum where people are speaking about both the trials and tribulations and the victories and triumphs, it's been really affirming to not feel so alone in it, because I think it's really easy to like be like, especially in workplaces, to feel like you are the only one of many different populations, the more marginalized identities that you are in. And then it's so wonderful and bittersweet to find that there are other people who feel like they're the only ones of their group as well. And we find, kind of find your tribe. So I think that has been really a triumph, is like finding my people and leaning into those relationships when things feel hard and when I'm feeling more apologetic than unapologetic, because not every day feels as empowering as others.
Such an important point, because every day does not feel the same. I think about that and thinking about one of my workouts where she says, today you might not have the strength that you had in the last workout, and that's okay. There's this kind of ebb and flow. So it's the same thing, just like what you were saying, Leandra, with our how we express ourselves, with our self-expression. Some days we feel comfortable enough to put it all out there. And some days it's like, ooh, maybe I'd like to keep some of that for myself because I don't really feel like I want to share it with others. So it's finding that balance. But you raise an excellent point about it being a way to really find your tribe, find your people. And maybe saying find your tribe might not be the best way to say it, but it's your group of people, the people who are for you. And that can be an important thing in our personal lives, but also in our professional lives, because in our workspaces, we need to have those safe places as well. And those people we can trust. Because one of the things when we think about self-expression, I want to say it's around half of people who are LGBTQIA2S plus are not necessarily out at work. So you think about something like that. And for myself as a queer woman, for any of us who identify under that rainbow, I like to call it family with a capital F. It's what I like to call it. But for any of us who are under that rainbow, there can be a cost associated with sharing that with others and having people know that about us, especially within our organizations. So when there comes a time where you can share that, then it's nice because you will see other people will start to reach out, and it can be another way to form those connections. Just like what you were talking about, Leandra, and just like what Greta was saying, our identities. So now this is going to lead us to kind of a pivotal moment in this journey, in this conversation, really talking about the hidden dangers of our unapologetic self-expression. Were you saying something?
Tanasha. Yes. Before we transition into the next segment, I just wanted to shout out. A couple of our listeners, Melissa C. And forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it correctly. She commented and she said that art is such a self-expression. Do it for you and not for others. And that's so true. And then she also commented, that story really resonated. Thank you for sharing, Greta. So I just wanted to shout out to our listeners that are commenting. Yes, and I think there's a little delay.
I love
Tanasha,
that. Thank
I don't
you
know
for
if you're
sharing
aware.
that with me, Chrystal, for all of us. Yes, it's so weird. I feel like I've been online today and there have been no issues. I've had other meetings online today, no problems. And then as soon as we start this, I'm like, what is going on? Why is my camera getting dark? Do I have a delay? Does someone else have a delay? It's that fun we get to have with technology in this space. But we just roll with it. I did a presentation last year where I don't know what was going on, but I was in presenter view the whole time. So everybody was kind of looking at my behind the scenes view in PowerPoint. It's fine. What are you going to do? So now as we move on and talk about those hidden dangers of our unapologetic self-expression. So as we start to get into this and explore this, I think it's really essential for us to acknowledge the shadows that accompany the light of authenticity, because it's like you have those positives, but then you can have some of those things that are not as positive as it relates to our self-expression. So for each of our wonderful co-hosts here, we have all had to tread this path in our own unique ways. And that means that we have each faced challenges that can lurk beneath the surface when it comes to how we're expressing ourselves, and that positive feedback that we may get, and some of the feedback we may get that is not so positive or not so receptive. So I'm going to turn this over to all of you, to our co-hosts, and I invite each of you to share something about your journey for your authenticity, and what hidden dangers have you encountered on this profound journey of self-expression, and how do you navigate those intricate nuances. And to our audience, as always, we want to hear your stories in the chat as well. So share with us any challenges or hidden dangers that you may have faced while expressing your true self. So who would like to go first and talk about any of those hidden dangers that you've encountered on your journey of self-expression, and share with us how you navigated those nuances?
Hey, Tanasha. So this is Courtni again. I wanted to mention that I believe this is really where understanding and community comes into play when we talk about the dangers or the hidden dangers of unapologetic self-expression. I think a lot of times when people express themselves, and if another group does not understand that expression, they might misinterpret the expression, they might judge the expression because it doesn't feel familiar. So I know I was partaking in a group discussion once, which might be helpful to our listeners or any of our team on the call right now. But really, it was breaking down those silos, breaking down those barriers, and having conversations. So we were talking about different similarities that we have. So whether we were on the same team, whether we were even in the same area geographically, we were just talking about different ways that we can relate to one another, different ways that we find value in each other. And honestly, at the end of the conversation, we were like, oh, you do this. Oh, I do this. Oh, you do that. I do this. Because there's always some way that we can relate to someone else. It might be hard at first to find the similarities, but there's always there's usually always common ground to find and be had. And so I think some of the dangers with misinterpretation of self-expression can come isolation, whether that's in the workplace or in a community. And there can also be professional consequences at times if you are in a workplace and you are trying to express yourself, and the person who you are working with or working for does not understand that self-expression again. And then, of course, if you are posting something on a social environment, on social media, there can be backlash with the self-expression as well too. So I think those are some of the pitfalls to self-expression that I've found. But I think building community, relating to others, and finding common ground is a really good way to break those barriers.
It's so interesting that is where your mind went, Courtni, because when I was thinking about some of the hidden dangers, I was thinking about how often with the disclosure of certain identities, people then regard you as an expert in that identity, regardless of how many people you know, how much book knowledge you have. Like, yes, I am the expert in my own opinion. However, so often, because I have many of my identities listed in my bios or in my profiles, people will reach out to me wanting to know a really big question about how certain population feels or experiences something at work, something in education. And while I can speak on my own experience, and I do have plenty of community that has shared lived experience with me, it's always interesting when strangers out of nowhere come into my inbox wanting to pick my brain about one of my identities. And while I do appreciate people wanting to acquire knowledge, and I do think it's important to seek common ground, share experiences, etc., I think that it's also important for people to remember that one person experiencing any identity or any form of marginalization or oppression is one person that has experienced it, and they're an expert in their own experience. And there are many experts in a variety of things, but I think treating any group as a monolith is a danger of self-expression, because then suddenly people expect you to be a spokesperson, and that can be isolating in its own way and tokenizing as well. Like, I do appreciate that people appreciate my opinion because of the many boxes that I check off as a marginalized person. However, I don't think it's fair for me to represent the many of any identity I occupy. So I think that's a danger as well. So community is really helpful that way as well, because then if someone's expecting me to be the only spokesperson, I know that there are other people who can also speak on behalf of this community and not just me alone.
You're right, Leandra. And I think that people forget that there are levels and layers to an experience, not only, your mental state or your disability or your race can come into play, but also economic factors. Also, have you had a history of trauma in your life or not? Like, there's so many layers that people don't think about when they're asking someone, well, what is it like to be neurodivergent? Well, that's a loaded question. I mean, it could be on either end of the spectrum, just based off of your life experiences. And we all have different life experiences. So I think a lot of people forget that there's like different layers to it that would contribute to the differences that we all experience, that one would all experience in a certain, I guess, bracket, for lack of a better term.
That makes me think of, it makes me think of too, like when we do choose to step outside of, step into ourselves or outside of the box that people put us in, whatever that is, are we also stepping outside of those expectations set? I know we talked about, kind of those expectations around what professionalism looks like in the workplace, right? And who sets those expectations and who upholds those standards, and and the power dynamics that go into all of that, and the who's going to be the one to step outside of, right, when those expectations exist. I mean, look at the nonsense that's happening, the kids in schools. I mean, I remember this, I remember this happening. Like, there was a ballet class with the girls where we were, and clearly it was a white-led ballet class, and they set restrictions around how the girls could wear their hair because they wanted everything to be so uniform, and they wanted everything, there was just zero thought. And then take that and put that into all across these workplaces, where we're having to pass legislation so that people can wear their natural hair, right? I'm speaking to but the realities too that that we have to face when we come up against that, and for me, and in my case, it's, when I do expose, if I do, decide to show up as myself and talk about my disabilities, talk about my neurodivergence, whatever that is, then how do people choose to look at you? Right? Because so often the stereotype around that is, well, you couldn't possibly be, first of all, because you don't look like you say you are. So either I'm lying or I'm making it up, or those kinds of things. Either that, or if they do believe you, then suddenly, well, does that mean you're less than, and you can't perform, and you can't do the thing? It's like, I'm still the same person that I've been for all this time doing all these things. It's just adds an extra lens, so that, there's lots of challenges and lots of, both individual level and systemic level challenges to, and I guess dangers of showing up as our authentic selves that we have to face when we choose whether or not and how we show up, and what does the authentic, what does that look like, and how, it just reminds me of how careful I think there's lots of discussion around, or like now these days, about, well, how do we create these workplaces where everybody can show up as their authentic selves and all of that? And that's it's fantastic to want to create an environment that allows that. But then I think there's also judgment on people who don't. And I think we need to be very conscientious about giving people space to show up as they're comfortable in that context where they are now in their lives. And I think that that's a really important part of above the conversation in DEI and DEIA that needs to continue to happen.
Excellent points, Greta. That is all so incredibly true, because it really is such a tenuous, I would say, dynamic, just kind of figuring that out in a workspace, especially if you're new to that workspace, because we have all seen those organizations where they may say, we want you to bring your authentic selves to work. And I would caution everyone, when you hear that, to look around you and to see how some others make those reactions that they receive. Because I think when you hear that, bring your authentic self to work, I would think most of us would want to just, yes, we are going to show up and we're going to be our authentic selves and we're going to be accepted for that. But are we? I can remember a meeting I was in the 2000s where talking about a situation and a racial microaggression that was said to me by one of the higher ups in an organization. And I'm sitting in a meeting talking about what happened with two women who were white, and they're kind of dancing around the issue. And, well, no, we don't think it happened because you're Black, which, how would they know? They've never been Black a day in their lives. And I said, well, I see it as a microaggression, and this is why it's problematic. And I start kind of breaking it down for them. And it was just like I had said something offensive. And I said, well, culturally, the culture I come from, we call a thing a thing. And so for me to show up authentically, I need to be able to say that was a microaggression. And challenging it doesn't mean that it wasn't a microaggression. So that can be one of those downsides that we can see in our places of business when we are trying to speak up, and especially when we're seeing those downsides and we're then trying to advocate for ourselves or for another person. It can be quite difficult in those times because there can be a reticence for people, especially around anything having to do with race. I don't know if anyone else has started reading this book, but I have been reading Robin DiAngelo's newest book, Nice Racism. And one of the things that she talked about, and I think it's just a great example of wanting something because it's what an organization is supposed to do, but not necessarily being prepared to deliver on that. There was a story about an organization and them wanting to add in to their diversity work that they were an anti-racist organization. And when the person who was working with them started asking what made their organization anti-racist, crickets. So you want to define your organization as this thing that's supposed to be positive and show how progressive your organization is, but you don't even know what it means for your organization to be anti-racist. So I think it's very similar when we look at something like authenticity. Bring your authentic self to work, but then you get the, oh, no, not like that. And you go, well, yeah, but what if this is who I am authentically? And people will say, be your authentic self. Oh, well, I didn't see you being that way authentically. So now it's based on your vision of whom you think I should be. What version of me you feel is most authentic, as opposed to me saying, this is who I am authentically. There's a big difference there. So thank you all for those wonderful insights, because I know that can be such a difficult area to navigate, and it can be quite harmful when it's not well received. So I appreciate each of you just sharing some of your experiences, your thoughts, and really kind of opening your hearts up and just being vulnerable in this conversation. So now what we're going to do is we're going to transition, talk a little bit about some, how do I want to say that? Yes, go ahead, Chrystal.
The delay is something else. So we have a question in the comments that I wanted to pose to the group. It's not targeted at one person, but I'll read it. We spoke a bit today about neurodivergence and abilities and how it shows up if and when choosing to disclose. Language is such a big part of how we receive information. Would you say that sharing the diagnosis, naming, or labeling it has helped or harmed your overall experience in the workplace environments, if you feel comfortable to share?
I feel comfortable with sharing. I'm welcome, or I feel glad with talking about that. Okay, we got that delay again. I want to make sure I'm not talking over Tanasha. So I will speak quickly on this. I think that obviously it depends on the workplace, but it has been a really interesting journey. I think it's been more rewarding than not letting people in on some of the needs, especially that are a result of my neurodivergence and of my disabilities. I think that advocating for myself and what I need in terms of prep for projects or prep for meetings or how I would like to get my feedback has resulted in having better communication with the people that I work with. So I think that that's been really helpful. And it's also kind of helped certain people with feeling a little bit more trust in coming to talk to me about certain identities that we share, and like how to initiate this conversation with HR. Since my job falls under HR, I think that it's been a good opportunity to open the door for conversation with other people who in spaces where we have not had these conversations before. And I think that just like I'm able to prepare more, and I'm able to communicate better when I know what other people need from me. And I think that when I communicate directly what I need from others, then they're also able to communicate that with me. And I just need very clear communication. Like there's so much nuance, especially in the corporate world, where it's like these words are being said, but when you say them like that, I feel like you mean something different. And if I don't ask you to be clear, I'm going to create 32 different endings to this story when I could just ask you to be clear. And so I think that it's been good in many ways for self-advocacy, as well as other people watching out or like changing their own behaviors in other meetings that aren't just meetings with me, because having an agenda ahead of time is really kind of great always. And I think that there are ways that we can be more inclusive, and it's like a universal, it uplifts everyone, and it also happens to be good for neurodivergent people or for disabled people. So I think depending on the safety that you feel at your organization, it can definitely be a good and rewarding thing, but that is not always true, because that safety is not always present.
That part. I so agree, Leandra, in terms of the capacity that opens up to be able to have conversations with people. But that means also that if I disclose, there's a good chance that those conversations are going to come to me. So do I have the energy to deal with that, to manage that as well? So when I have this conversation with people, I'm generally I don't lean either way, right? When I'm having this conversation with someone, I'm very clear about, and that's kind of what you said at the end, Leandra, is that it really depends on your individual circumstances. And I will not recommend one way or the other. It is absolutely a personal choice that you have to make based on you, your capacity, your needs, and what you know about your environment, because there's so many possibilities on both sides of the coin, right? The good, bad, and the ugly. So I really appreciate. I think it's Melissa, the question, and I think that that's an opportunity for folks when you're having that to really talk about, if you don't identify, for example, but you're talking about trying to create an environment where people feel like they can come forward and talk about it, what do you know? What are you doing to prepare yourself so that when somebody does bring that up, so when somebody says, this is a need that I have, or this is, hey, I'm just letting you know, are you prepared to have that conversation on your end? And how are you preparing yourself as well as individuals, if you're in roles that people come to you, or if you're as an organization, how are you preparing yourself to be in a position to manage that when somebody does bring that information to you? Because now you've got to do something about it. And that's, where a lot of the harm comes in too. Is where people do disclose, and then suddenly it's like thrown back in our laps and saying, well, now I can't do that for you. That's outside of other people. It wouldn't be fair to other people if I offered this to you. There's a lot of responses out there that are less than helpful and part of the larger equity conversations that we need to have. But just because of that, I specifically I won't recommend one way or another when having a conversation with an individual about whether to come forward with that. I'll talk it out with them. Absolutely. Ask questions, try to, help them see where they are. But I could never answer that question for someone else.
I wanted to piggyback on what Greta just said. I don't necessarily feel like it's a good idea or a bad idea. And I liked what Tanasha said about looking around. What does your organization look like? Do they embrace this sort of thing already, or are they just dipping their toe in the water trying to do what everybody else is doing? I feel like a lot of, and maybe this is just my personal experience, I feel like the organizations I've worked for, when being your authentic self, bringing your authentic self to the workplace, I've worked for some organizations in the past where they weaponize it against you. And if you are in that environment where that's not generally how they operate, that can be a really unsafe thing to do. I feel like retaining that part of yourself is kind of like a protection mechanism. And by revealing everything or the wrong things, I feel like it could leave you exposed, and then you're not protected. Then you can't self-protect. I can definitely see how Leandra was saying, where you want to make sure that people, like if you have issues with clear communication, that you make that known so that you can equip somebody to communicate with you effectively. But you really, really have to be careful about the organization or the environment that you're in, to make sure that that would really truly be accepted, that they really and truly want to know this about you to help you be better. I've just seen it go both ways too many times. And me personally, I've experienced it where it was weaponized against me. And I'm just not a fan of revealing everything. I'm definitely about self-protection, self-preservation, and self-protection. If it's going to protect me, I'm going to do that. If it's going to take care of me, I'm going to do that. So that I loved what both you, Greta, and Leandra said in regards to that question.
Thank you all for that. Those are it's one of those things where it's like, I want to dive into every single point that was made, but I know we don't have time for that, because whenever we get into these conversations, just the richness of what we all have to share collectively is something I just always appreciate, because I think it's just a thing of beauty to be able to have these open, honest, and earnest and vulnerable conversations. So and those are the kind of conversations that you can have in a space where you do have that safety. And a lot of workspaces are just ill equipped in that regard. And so thinking of that and how workspaces may not be as equipped, we're going to go ahead and start talking a little bit about building those inclusive spaces. I can't believe that we're already 50 minutes in, and so we have like 9 minutes left. I'm like, where does the time go? Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to take a quick moment to acknowledge some of the comments that kind of came through as we were speaking in the last segment. Jennifer Allenbaugh, I apologize if I butchered that. I'm sorry. She says that when there is psychological safety, everyone has agency to disclose or not. Jennifer also commented, Tanasha, yes, that part about actually practicing the work. Like a colleague said the other day, there's a difference between being interested in inclusion versus being committed to the work, and that stuck with me. Jennifer also commented, yes, Leandra. Let's see, there's a couple of others here. Community is everything. I am so incredibly drawn to the support and love of community. That was from Elisa. How empowering, Leandra. Wow, feeling self-empowered and empowering others through just being you. Look at that. That's Melissa's comment. Let's see. Speak on it, Courtney. That was Melissa. Let's see. I think that was just about it. Melissa said, thank you for bringing that awareness to my language, Tanasha. Not sure. I think that was an earlier comment that you made. And then I think that is it that I can see. Find your tribe. Love that, Leandra. That was from Melissa as well. Yeah. So I think we're caught up on comments, questions from the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chrystal. I'm so happy to hear how people are engaging in the comments, because that's really exactly what we're trying to foster, are these kinds of conversations. So when we think about building those inclusive spaces, like, I'm going to kind of throw this out here for all of you fabulous co-hosts. So how can individuals, organizations, entire communities, how can we build inclusive spaces that not only acknowledge but celebrate diverse self-expression? And for anyone who wants to answer this, if you can provide some opportunities or provide some kind of tangible steps, opportunities that organizations will have to foster that inclusivity in their spaces when you answer.
I'll start. I think a good way to start building these spaces is to actually put people from these communities into leadership positions, whether it be, C-suite leadership, or, encouraging and supporting the foundation of companies and organizations created by marginalized communities. I think that once you have leadership that looks like others at the helm, you'll naturally have the attraction from others that are also in the particular marginalized community. I think that's it. I think there's a lot of halting of those things happening. I'm going to try to not remain political on here. But there's a lot of halting of that type of thing happening in our country. And I feel like that halting is going to really kind of affect our ability to bring people of leadership in that have these types of differences. Because I mean, how amazing would it be to work for someone who is also neurodivergent and they also understand the different nuances of being neurodivergent, and they can have a perspective to implement some accommodations for people that fall in that category. So I think in order for there to be some changes to existing structures, there need to be an allowance for people from these communities to be in the leadership positions. I think that's a good start. I think that it's at this point a little difficult because there's a lot of systemic things and systematic things built in that would prevent that from happening. But in an ideal world, I think that that would be a good start, is to bring people in that look like you, bring people in that look like the talent that you're trying to attract. And that's just my personal opinion on that.
Agreed. And quickly piggybacking off of your thoughts, Chrystal, I think that is so relevant. Thinking about creating these inclusive, safe spaces. First, it's really mindfulness. So taking a moment to understand the layout, understand how that person's feeling, also including empathy, understanding how you would feel in their shoes, how you would feel in their environment. It doesn't matter what it is. It's really not difficult to be kind and to have an understanding. Secondly, I would say educating. So if you are an employer or you're working at a company and you feel you want to drive this needle forward, I would definitely say taking some time to either educate yourself and then share that knowledge with others, because sometimes not everyone starts from the same level, and that's okay. It's just a matter of being open. So just like we say on the podcast, being open and unmasking, which is vulnerability, which is really going to be the third part, being vulnerable to understanding that it's okay if you don't know everything. Even the experts don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. So being okay to not know, being okay to understand how someone could feel from their point of view, and then not being afraid to learn and ask questions, appropriate questions. And then finally, I would say support. So if you are already in a leadership position, asking, how can I support you? What can I do? And just being curious, because sometimes even just asking and saying, how can I support you? I can talk to you. I can provide resources to you, is really all that someone needs. It doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be expensive. It's just being mindful and then taking the time to actually act.
So true. All excellent, excellent points, Courtney. And I will say, when we first started talking about this topic and kind of going through what we were going to talk about, and I saw that about ways to be inclusive, one of the first things that came to mind for me, just a super quick point, is the importance of allowing people to have their pronouns in their email signatures. If you are an organization in 2024 and you are not allowing your employees to include their pronouns in their emails, you are missing out on an opportunity to help people receive the acknowledgement that they so rightfully deserve, because our pronouns, they do matter. And there shouldn't have to be market research and all of these other things because customers might be upset that there are pronouns in emails. So do you want that authenticity and you want to be that inclusive space? Or because if you're going to exclude someone's pronouns for the comfort of your customers, that's not providing an inclusive space for the people who are within that organization. So that's one of the things that I thought about immediately when I saw that question, just the importance of that acknowledgement. That simple acknowledgement goes such a long way, and it really helps people feel seen. So now that we have taken the time to really start unpacking all of these things, Oh my goodness. And anybody who's on here right now can see how lengthy our conversations can get, because this is just what happens when the five of us get together and start talking. So now we're going to wrap up. This is going to conclude our exploration of some of those hidden dangers of unapologetic self-expression. We hope that this episode has really sparked meaningful reflections and conversations. Please remember that self-expression, it is a powerful tool, and understanding its complexities is equally important to having the self-expression. So if you have thoughts, questions, or stories you'd like to share, we'd always love to hear from you. Please connect with us on LinkedIn through our page. You can also use our hashtag DEI Unmasked, or you can drop a comment. But before we sign off, we really want to emphasize that the conversation doesn't end here. So stay true to yourselves, embrace the diversity of expression around you, and as always, keep unmasking, keep engaging in these conversations, and let's continue shaping a future where diversity is celebrated, equity is the norm, and inclusion is just second nature. Thank you all for unmasking with us. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep unmasking the world around you. We'll see you next month.